You have experience with projects, some likely very good and some maybe less good. Today, we're going to talk about projects, but in a new way, a transformative way. When you are finished listening, you will see projects not just as a part of your work, but as the way we do work, and why that change in perspective can make such a big difference for you and your organization. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could in the future join us for live episodes when they're live streamed, and therefore get this information sooner. That sounds like a pretty good idea. If you want to find out how to do that and actually watch and not just listen, which I know most of you are doing if you're on the podcast, just go to our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, which are two of the places where we do live streaming. Not the only ones, but two of them. You can go join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups at remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. That'd be a good thing to do. If you like what you are hearing today and want help in developing the leaders in your organizations, let's talk. Reach out to info@kevineikenberry.com and we'll schedule time to learn more about your needs and how we might be able to help. And with that, I'm going to bring in my guest. Here he is. Let me introduce him and we will dive in. His name is Antonio Nieto-Rodriguez. He is a world-leading expert in project management, strategy execution, and organizational transformation. And we're going to talk about all three today. He is the creator of the concept of the project economy, which advocates for organizations to shift from a traditional hierarchical structure to a fully project-driven one. He is the author of 5 books, including Harvard Business Review's Project Management Handbook and his newest book, focus of our conversation today, Powered by Projects, Leading Your Organization in the Transformation Age. He was selected as one of the top 50 influential management thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50 in both 2023 and 2025. He's previously served as the chairman of the Project Management Institute, likely heard of that, and as a visiting professor at top business schools around the world. He's joining us today from Madrid. And Antonio, I'm glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
I'm very happy to be here, Kevin. Thank you for the invitation, and I very much look forward to discussion here.
So let's just start right here. This book, this is what Kevin says. This book is a manifesto for something that you call project-driven organizations. So let's start there. What is a project-driven organization?
Well, Kevin, I think you mentioned that in the introduction. I think we're moving to from a world where projects are a bit like side jobs or part-time activities to a kind of where we need to work, where the work happens, and the companies, organizations are not yet there. So there's a lot of change to need to happen in organization in terms of structure, hierarchy, culture, to get into a fast execution company, which I call project-driven organization.
So you've just hinted at this, but I think the important question here is you make a case that this is where organizations are moving, whether we like it or not. But my question for you is, why now? Why has that happened without us maybe noticing? And why is it so critical that we start to think differently about the way we're structuring our organizations?
Well, I think we're at the stage where companies probably have more projects than operational work. The amount of projects that companies are carrying or trying to implement is way more than what they actually can do. So there has been a huge escalation or explosion of project work. And we get to a point where artificial intelligence and robots will do most of the operational work. So what's left? It's just project, agile, product development teams working in projects, small teams. And for that, you need a special structure. You cannot run projects or transformation in hierarchies and operations driven organizations. That's the past, and we need to move on. We've gone through a transition phase, which is the agile organization that broke down some molds and some heavy stuff from the past, but now we need to find another way to structure organizations to execute and transform faster.
So I'm guessing that some of the people who are listening are saying, well, we have a project management office. Is that
Yeah.
what he's talking about? Let's talk about, like you're advocating, suggesting that we need to make a sea change in the way
Correct.
we not just do the work, but look at and structure around the work. And I would guess that you're going to say that a project management office might be a step,
Mhm.
but it may also be a barrier. So let's talk about that structure, which has become pretty common, right?
Yeah.
Where does that fit in this transformation, and what role does that play?
I think the project management office is, like you said, a step. If it was set up in the right direction, many PMOs have been set up just for controlling, monitoring, chasing people, and that's not how work gets done today. So, for me, the added value of a PMO is when they focus on value creation, on pushing the strategic initiatives, of helping leaders to prioritize across the organization. If that's the type of PMO, then you will have a future in this project-based economy. But it's really like I have a chart, Kevin, that shows the amount of work done by operational activities and amount of work done by projects. And 80 years exactly. So 80 years ago, we were all doing operational activities. I know, right? Nah, you got it there. And projects were temporary, a few people working in projects, and this has been slowly going down. So most likely everyone in this call has some part-time jobs doing projects, part-time jobs doing operational activities. With AI and automation and robotization, that operational activities will drop down. I work in a bank today. In a bank, there's more IT people than bankers. Most of the people are working in project-based agile team, product development teams. The hierarchies have disappeared almost because there's such a level of automation and blockchains and so on. So that will happen in every organization where, yeah, operations will be run by machines. And so that's good. I don't mind. I think we can add more value in the other space, which is change projects, innovation.
So I hinted in the open that everyone who's listening or watching has experiences with project management or with projects for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Some good, some
Yeah.
maybe not so good.
Yeah.
So what do you say to folks who are buying the idea that you're talking about, but their own experience is not so rosy? So like, how do you help people move past if maybe our organization isn't doing or hasn't done projects so well? Like, how do you help people rationalize that out?
Well, there's two views I have on that point, Kevin. There is people who have gone through project management and it didn't work very well. It was tough and they didn't feel like having a pleasant experience. There is projects are never easy. A plan never goes according to the plan. Even if you have the best plan in the world, it's going to change. There's going to be struggle. So I think there's that part that we need to get used to, being able to take action quickly, being feeling comfortable in uncertainties, being comfortable in pivoting. So that part we will not remove. That part we all need to learn to deal with. There's the other part from attached to project management, and it's a discipline with bad connotation because we've made project management way too complex. We're not building bridges or submarines. And my earlier HBR book was on simplification, modernization of some project management concepts that apply for 80-90% of the projects. It doesn't need to be complex. You don't need 25 pages of documents to talk about your project. So I think once you learn that you can run projects with some very simple tools, I developed the project canvas, one pager, understanding the benefits. So if you understand that you can do many of the projects much more simple than what you thought, and not filling in papers and templates and logs, and then you will start enjoying, because then you see how you're building uh, capabilities. You're building, I call projects, your projects are your future as individual or as an organization. So you're actually building the future for your organization. There's nothing more important than that, right?
For sure. As I was reading and as I'm chatting with you, I'm
Mhm.
continuing to think about what I will call the yes buts, right? That people
Yeah,
are going to ask.
yeah,
Again, even if they like the direction that you're describing, I think the other big yes but that I want you to address before we get into some very specific things that we can do to make the transformation start to happen. The other
yeah,
yes but is, okay, if our world is operations, like there's ongoing stuff. If I'm in projects, like what happens when the project ends? Like,
yeah.
does my job go away? A lot of
Mhm.
times the people that are on a project we hire in as temporary, or we bring in
Correct.
consultants. Like, what happens, Antonio, when the project ends?
There will be more projects. That's one of the biggest challenges, Kevin, that we need to overcome, which is that attachment to your day-to-day job, which is going to disappear anyway. But we need an anchor in work, and that anchor is your day-to-day job, operation job. But I think that's what frustrates me a lot. Companies that have 50,000 employees, and you want to do a big project with 20 people, it's just they don't give you 20 people. They give you 40 part-time people. And this is how can you explain that a 50,000 company, you just get part-time people to do a major transformation? So we need to learn, and leaders have to push for jobs should be more flexible. You should not be attached to a function 15 years, 10 years, 5 years, even 3 years, and rotation. And I think there's nothing better way to learn and develop new skills. And my view is there will be another project at the end of your current projects for sure, almost 100%. So don't get attached. The best projects require fully dedicated resources. And that's, I think, what we're going forward.
I
Yeah.
have often said, with,
Yeah.
and I'm not a very cynical person, Antonio. People that are listening might know that about me if they've been around a while. I am not a very cynical person, and yet I've often been heard saying, if you've got if you've got, I'll use your example, if you've got 20, 40 halftime people, you got no people.
No
Like,
people.
you
No
got no
people.
people.
No, I agree
And then we've got people,
100%.
well, a fourth of your time is on the project. Well, like, really, seriously,
Yeah.
nothing's
Yeah.
happening here.
Yeah. And you have like 10,000 employees. So how can you not? It's just incredible, right, Kevin? It just doesn't make sense. But we're in that stage now. So things, hopefully, with the book and other people like you, we need to move the needle. This has to happen, because you know the problem, Kevin? This is happening in Asia, China, other they don't have these problems in China. They go fast trains after fast trains. So they're going to take over if we don't wake up, both in Europe and North America, with this old-fashioned thinking of I need my day-to-day job. That doesn't work like that anymore.
So you built the book around a blueprint,
Yeah.
and we don't have time, obviously, to unpack all of the
Hmm.
blueprint. But can you give us the big picture of it? I'm going to dive into two or three pieces of it,
Sure.
but give people the big picture about what you mean by this blueprint to create this project-driven organization.
Sure, Kevin. So I think after a lot of research and being myself working in corporates like GSK, exactly eight dimensions there. But I work in corporate as well. I was a transformation director for GSK, for BNP Paribas, PwC, and what we realized is that it's just very difficult to do transformation work or project work in established company like those. And most of the literature, most of the advice goes into how can we do transformation projects better. But I realized that's not enough. You can have the perfect transformation plan and it's going to fail anyway, because you need to work in other two layers, which is the senior leaders. These are the people who decide which projects have to be done, which projects should be killed, which projects are priority. They also sponsor these projects. The senior leaders is not just about launching a project, it's about being there in the hard times and pushing them forward and spending time on that. So that's a layer that sometimes is covered, but not mostly. And then there's the organizational piece, which is about agility, hierarchies being removed, quick decision making, a culture where innovation can be taken, risk can be taken. Uh, and that's where I try to put that in the blueprint. It's the first time I try to do that you need to work on the three. If you really want to have impact and build these capabilities within, you need to change your organization, culture, hierarchies. You need to improve as a leader, spending more time in this space, which they don't like because it's outside their comfort zone. Leaders like to spend time in their comfort zone, which is what we've done in the past, running the business, and then looking at transformation in slightly different ways so that that can move faster. And that's kind of the blueprint that you just show in that scheme. But I have it very clear. If you don't work in the three at the same time, you're not going to make it.
So at the top of your blueprint,
Yeah.
and for those of you who aren't watching, or even I put it up very quickly as I showed the book very quickly. It's a circle with these 8 components, 3 big chunks, but 8 components. The top one, and the first one you talk about, is culture.
Yeah.
Why does it need to come first?
Culture, it's the most influential part in any organization, I think. And for me, when you want to change like culture, and I talk about that, we hear about psychological safety, but also learning from failure. I think this is something that is not very much accepted, but things stopping projects should be something that we hear all the time, and it should not be bad. It's a great opportunity to learn. So why don't we do that more often, right? So that ability to stop and nobody blaming anyone, but just saying, well done, I think requires courage. So creating that safety where people can see these failures as a growth opportunity, and this has to be led by example. Culture is led, and it's just from the leaders who need to change their behavior, and that will be cascaded. Unfortunately, most cultures today is command and control, and they kind of play a little bit on the innovation piece, but actually it's not. And for me, that's the fundamental shift: is let's play in that space openly, and give the people that platform for trying out and thinking about trying new things. One of the things, maybe going a bit sideways, Kevin, most of the projects are incremental improvements. Why? Because we don't let the people try and do crazy stuff, and they're afraid of failure. But we should have more exponential projects. So that's all part of the culture.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite parts of the
Really?
book, as it turns out. I want to reflect back on something else, and I'm going to kind of go back to everyone's experience with projects. And we talk about project management. You were the chairman of the Project Management Institute, and yet you're promoting in this book, with which I wholeheartedly agree, the idea of project leadership, not just project management. So in your mind, let's frame that difference, because as much as anything, when people hear the word project, they hear project management, right? And so there's a big psychological barrier there, I think. And so in order for people to choose something different, they need to know what the different is. So when you think about project leadership, how would you contrast that with the fundamentals of project management?
I think I love this point, Kevin, because I think that's, despite the difficulties of getting the organization right and making fundamental shifts in the leadership piece as well, the bigger change I see is needed is the mindset of project managers. They're not bad people, but they've been trained to be just followers, controllers, and talking about time and cost, when the actually value of a project is the benefits, the impact. And so what I insist is that change that to be feel ownership of your project. Feel like a leader, feel like an entrepreneur. When you run a project, you're taking risks, you're managing the assets of your company. So fight for it. If you need to talk to your CEO or the president or the chairman, you call in immediately. If your project has no sponsor, you stop it immediately and demand your company to have a sponsor. So this is a really change in behavior, and this is what I call mindset change from managing to leadership. You are building the future of your company. There's nothing more important than you fight for it. There's no hierarchies in projects. This is another of the big mistakes that we've done in the past. Following projects like an operations with levels of hierarchy. In projects, you don't need hierarchy. You need to work as a team and execute fast. You need a decision you call, regardless of who that person is, to get a solution and move on. So that's where I think we're not ready. You need to be able to confront the CEO, say, listen, if you're in, but I want to see you 2 hours per week in this project, CEO. If not, let's stop it. What's the point? You're wasting your time. We're wasting company resources. So that's, I think, the steeper curve. It's possible, but I'm not sure project managers see the urgency for that.
Well, or feel safe enough to ask.
Or feel
I mean,
safe.
there's a whole bunch of stuff there, right? So
Mhm.
let me do this. If I said, give me 3 skills, so I'm with you on mindset, by the way, that if we don't get the mindset right, it doesn't matter what the skill set is, because if they
Yeah.
don't match, it won't matter. But let's presume that we've got the mindset right. What would be the 3 skills that you see most often lacking or most needed to lead projects rather than simply manage them?
I think one core skill that somehow it has been ignored by most project management methodologies is creating a team. And we focus most on the deliverables and the artifacts, and we always forget to make a team. And that's the most important step that you can do in a kickoff and at the beginning is from a bunch of people who are most likely part-time, you can still make a team. A team is a team that feels united, that everybody has a role to play. And when they get together, they work hard together, there's trust. But when was the last time any listeners have felt like we're building a team? Probably never, because we jump on the technical aspects. So I think building teams is probably the number one skill that we need to develop. It's not that difficult. Second, having that kind of business mindset. Often you talk to project managers and you ask them about the financials and they don't know. How can you not know? I don't know that you don't need to know how to calculate the net present value or return investment, but you should know that your project is going to need so much investment and that's the return. So leaders talk about numbers. That doesn't need that you need to know how to calculate, but at the top of the mind, be a business person. You're managing assets, you're building the future, you're building value creation. So that aspect goes along with the understanding how your project fits the strategy. So that's around numbers, business strategy. And the third one, maybe it's too broad, leadership, but having that courage to step up and don't hide the problems. Actually, the project manager of the future for me is somebody that feels super comfortable alone. Kevin, this is the problem. I need your help, right? And you might be the president of the biggest company in the world, but Kevin, this is a joint effort. I need your help. And I'm not blaming anybody, but this is the problem. This is I call them, you need to get used to bring the elephant to the room. That's basically your role if you want your project to succeed. So that's courage, stamina, being confident with yourself. So that would be the 3: the team, the mindset on the business entrepreneur, and then having the courage to stand up and ask for help or challenge the organization.
I love the connection, and I'm so glad you said it. I love the connection between creating the team and this whole conundrum that you and I talked about people only being half-time on the project, right? Because if we're not creating the team and people are half-time, we really got no shot. But to your
Yeah.
point, if we are coalescing that group, and yes, they have other responsibilities, whether it's sort of matrixed or whether it's they've got to tie back to their regular job or whatever that looks like. But if they really feel a part of and connected to this group of people on this project, that's the best shot you've got to deal with that problem of halftime, quarter time, whatever.
100%, Kevin. And how often does that happen? 0%,
Not enough.
1%, 2%. Yeah.
So the other thing that you talk, one of the many other things you talk about in the book that we've been skirting around that's important here is governance.
Yeah.
It's not just, it is governance of the projects, but it's also the fact that in order for us to move in this sort of transformational way, we're going to have to think about governance very differently than we do now.
Absolutely.
So in just, what would be a couple of key points you would share to help us think about overcoming the governance, what I'll call the governance barrier?
Yeah, I love that, Kevin. Yeah, governance barrier. I think governance is seen again as a more control mechanism. And what I propose in the book, it should be an agile governance. For example, why do we have just monthly steering committees on transformation work? Why who invented that it should be per month? So one thing I advise, for example, is have that agility. If you want to accelerate any project at this moment, anybody listening, there's very simple formulas. It's have a steering committee twice per week instead of once per month. If you have the right level of people, this project is going to just speed up like crazy. It's going to send a very strong message to the company saying, listen, we leaders, we have prioritized this initiative. We're meeting twice per week. So that you know that whenever you need to make a decision, you always put your time on this transformation, right? So governance should be like an accelerator. Sometimes you go faster, sometimes you slow down, but always around value creation, not about controlling. Controlling, you can keep that for operations. That's what you need to control. In projects, you need to have agility to take quick decisions, to pivot when needed, and to push harder. So that's kind of the bigger change on the governance, from an old-fashioned governance to a more driving kind of governance.
You know, I'm struck as I'm listening to you right there that there are people who are saying, yeah, that sounds great, but we could never do that. And I would say, I'll bet I can give you an example when you did, and that was at the start of COVID. Because at the start of COVID, that's what everybody did.
Exactly, Kevin.
They met every day or every other day. And guess what? We made mistakes. Yeah, we didn't. Yes, we had uncertainty.
Yeah.
Just like we have in our projects. And guess what we did? We made changes fast. We iterated, we tried, we figured stuff out because we had to for the business. And I think, Antonio, your big message is if we want our business to thrive, this is what we have to do.
Yes, I love that analogy, Kevin, because we actually did many of the things that I cover in my talks, or is what we did in the COVID. We ruthlessly prioritized. We killed 80% of the projects and even more. And that's what one of the things I ask leaders is, let's start by killing 50% of the projects, say 60. Nothing will happen. And you'll free up capacity, you clear clarity. And then that was the dedication. We focused on 3 projects during COVID for intensively. And that's how we managed to come out of a situation nobody had experienced before. So why did we move away? Well, there's many reasons, but if you want to become project driven, this is exactly what happened there, Kevin. You put the projects up front, and that's what we saw with the COVID.
Before I move on, I've got a couple of final things I want to ask you. Is there anything that I didn't ask or that we didn't talk about that you really would like to put a comment on before we start to wrap up?
Maybe on the leader, Kevin. I think leaders are a big cause of project failure. I think that's where we need to do a lot of work. I'm glad HBR is supporting, and they see there's a big need for executives to play a bigger role in this space. I always say they prefer their comfort zone, which is the running of the business. They might spend 90% of their time there. It should be the opposite. They should be spending 60, 70% in the unknown and leading the organization in that space, not what we know. So I think that's where any help, any good examples will help us to get there. If you look at the greatest leaders, they actually spent a lot of time. I had this data point that Steve Jobs spent like 2 days per week when they started to work on the Project Purple, which was the first iPhone. And they asked him, Steve, what are you doing there in that project? If you have a huge company, say, that's the most important part of our work, the new iPhone. That's where, so I'm spending 2 days per week there. Why should not I be? If I'm not there, then I'm making something wrong. And I think that's a game changer when you start seeing that space. I know Alan Mulally quite well from Ford and Boeing, and he's a remarkable example of how you can put those the time of your leadership into the transformation space.
I love that. So I am curious. I'm going to shift gears on you before we finish.
Yeah.
It's very clear to all of us that are listening to you that you know your work. And it's not surprising to anyone now that you're truly a world expert on projects. I want to know
Thank
what
you.
you do for fun, because I'm hoping it's not all projects.
No, I like to travel. I like to watch soccer or football. I like to play some kind of sport called paddle. In Spain is very popular. A bit of golf. I like to, a nice hobby is food. I love to try things and eat outside. And so, yeah, the normal things, I think that's what I like. Be around good people, having good conversations like this one, Kevin. It's just so I'm happy at the end of the day.
I love that. Antonio, what are you reading these days?
Well, I just bought it. I just was very interested by the title. It's called When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows by Steven Pinker. And I just got attached to that title because I'm just curious. So I'm starting to read that. I just found it was recommended, and I'm going to read that. So When Everyone Knows What Everybody Knows. It sounds like very interesting.
We will have that in the show notes, and we will have information about Powered by Projects, leading your organization in the transformational age, also in the show notes.
Thank you.
Where do you want to point people, Antonio, before we wrap up? Where do you want to point people? Where can they connect with you? What do you want them to know?
The usual LinkedIn, it's easy. Just put my full name, my website, AntonioNietoRodriguez.com. And please reach out. Oh, it's there already. Thank you. Wow, that's Pete. I love it. Thank you, Kevin.
AntonioNietoRodriguez.com, no dash. And that will get you to be connected with Antonio. So before we go, everyone, the question that I always ask all of you who are listening, and this is the only question I get to ask that no one will respond to, and in many ways, it's the most important question. And the question is, now what? What action are you going to take as a result of being here? What idea did you hear that you will translate into action? Because it's one thing to change your mindset, which I promised you at the outset would happen. And I hope it has happened. But as Antonio would say, mindset's not enough. That's just the starting point for actually doing something. And so the now what question challenges us to put into action the things that we've learned. I hope that you will take that question to heart and take action. And I hope that you will. Well, before I say that, Antonio, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Kevin. A pleasure. Love the conversation. Thank you.
And everybody, if you loved it like we did, then you want to make sure you come back, right? Make sure you subscribe wherever you're watching. And if you really loved it, tell someone else to come listen or watch and have them subscribe as well. And be back with us next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.